I woke up in a hospital after a massive stroke. My right leg was paralyzed, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't say a single word. My son placed a stack of papers on my bed and whispered, "Sign them. If you don't, your old dog dies today, and you'll die with nothing." To save my only friend, I signed with my trembling left hand. Before sunset, he dumped me and my aging German shepherd at an abandoned farmhouse, then drove away without looking back. As his taillights disappeared into the gray distance, he had no idea. Everything was already beginning to change. I am so grateful you are here with me today. Before we begin, drop a comment and tell me where you are watching from. Your city, your country, I want to know. Every single one of you matters to this channel. This story contains fictional elements crafted for storytelling purposes. Any resemblance to actual names or places is coincidental, but everything this story is trying to tell you is worth hearing. I have been waking up at 4:30 in the morning for 41 years. Not because an alarm told me to. Not because I had a meeting or a deadline breathing down my neck. I woke up because the machines were already running inside my head before my feet ever touched the floor. Pressure tolerances load, calculations, the particular grinding sound a misaligned drive shaft makes when nobody has caught it in time. My brain never fully shut down. It just idled the way a good engine idles, low, steady, and ready to go the moment you put it in gear. My name is Arthur Cole. I am 70 years old. I built Cole Precision Manufacturing from a single rented bay in a Grand Rapids industrial park into a chain of 4 facilities employing over 300 men and women. I did not do it with investor money or business school theories. I did it with these 2 hands, calloused, scarred, and permanently stained with machine oil along the knuckle lines, in a way that 40 years of soap and water never fully fixed. My wife Eleanor used to say my hands looked like they belonged to a man twice my size. She always said it like a compliment. I always took it like one. Eleanor has been gone 11 years now. After she passed, I let the machines get louder in my head, and I made my peace with that. Work was clean. Work was honest. Work did not leave a hollow space behind your sternum that no tool in any catalog could ever repair. The morning of March the 9th started exactly the way every morning started. I was in my truck by 5:15, Max riding shotgun the way he always did, 92 pounds of German shepherd, taking up more than his rightful share of the bench seat, and not apologizing for a single ounce of it. Max was 8 years old, gray around the muzzle now, but his eyes were still sharp and golden, watching the road ahead like he had somewhere important to be. "You're restless this morning," I told him, as I pulled out of the driveway. Max whined a low, unhappy sound from deep in his chest and pressed his nose against the passenger window, fogging the glass. "Knock it off," I said. "It's just another Tuesday." He whined again, louder this time, and turned those gold eyes on me with an expression that made my chest tighten in a way I could not explain. I reached over and scratched behind his ear the way he liked, and he pressed his big head into my palm so hard it nearly pulled my hand off the wheel. "All right," I said. "All right. I hear you." But I did not listen. That is the truth of it, and I have lived with it every day since. I left Max in the truck, with the windows cracked, and walked into the main floor of Facility 1 at 5:47. The morning crew was already in. I could hear the deep rhythmic thrum of the CNC machines warming up. Smell the sharp, familiar bite of cutting fluid and hot metal that had lived in my lungs for 4 decades. Pete Garza, my floor supervisor for 17 years, looked up from his clipboard and raised 2 fingers in his usual half salute. "Morning, Mr. Cole." Conveyor on line 3 was running rough yesterday afternoon. Kowalski thinks it's the tension roller. Kowalski's probably right, I said, already moving toward line 3. Tell him I'll take a look before the 8 o'clock run. You got it. The floor was loud and warm and smelled like everything I had built, and for a few minutes I walked through it the way I always walked through it, checking gauges, running my hand along a machine casing, to feel for a regular vibration, stopping to ask Rodriguez why the output stack near the east wall looked lower than yesterday's count. We had a tooling jam around 2 in the afternoon, sir, Rodriguez said, straightening up fast the way young guys did around me. Cleared it in 40 minutes. Should catch up by noon. Make sure you do, I said. That contract does not have a 40-minute margin. I was crouching down beside the Line 3 conveyor, my right hand braced against the frame, and my left hand testing the tension roller the way Kowalski had flagged when it happened. There was no warning. No pain, no dizziness, nothing that told me what was coming. One moment I was a man who had stood on factory floors for 40 years and knew every sound and smell and vibration of the machines around him. The next moment, the floor came up to meet my face with a violence that seemed almost personal. I heard Pete Garza shout my name. I heard boots running across concrete. I heard the machines keep running indifferent the way machines always are. I could not move my right leg. I understood this immediately, and with absolute clarity, even as the ceiling above me tilted and swam. My right hand would not close when I told it to. My mouth opened, and I tried to tell Pete to call 911, tried to tell him I was conscious, tried to tell him anything at all, and what came out was a broken, garbled sound that did not resemble a single word I had ever spoken in my life. Mr. Cole! Pete dropped to his knees beside me, his face white as paper, his hands gripping my shoulder. Mr. Cole, can you hear me? Somebody call 911 right now. Rodriguez, call it now. I heard Rodriguez on the phone, his voice cracking with fear he was trying to hold back. I heard the machines still running. I felt Pete's hand on my shoulder, gripping hard, and I wanted desperately to tell him to take his hand off my good shoulder, because it was the only one I could still feel properly. But the words would not come out. Nothing would come out. My brain was screaming in perfect, complete sentences, and my mouth was producing sounds that meant nothing at all. That was the moment I understood what had happened to me. I lay on the concrete floor of the factory I had built with my own hands, surrounded by the machines I had designed and the men I had hired, and I could not speak a single word to any of them. My mind was as sharp and clear as it had ever been in my life, and it was absolutely, completely trapped. The ambulance took 11 minutes. I counted every second of them on the ceiling above me, memorizing the water stain near the overhead vent that I had been meaning to have someone check for 3 months and never gotten around to. Pete held my hand the entire time and talked to me steadily, telling me the paramedics were coming, telling me to hang on, his voice breaking badly on the last word, in a way he clearly had not intended. When they loaded me onto the stretcher and wheeled me toward the bay doors, I turned my head and looked back at the floor one time. The machines were still running. The conveyor on Line 3 was still turning with its rough, uneven rhythm. Nobody had stopped the production run. That was the last time I walked out of my own factory under my own power. In the ICU that evening, the neurologist, a careful, soft-spoken man named Dr. Brennan, explained to the figure standing on the other side of the glass partition that I had suffered a significant ischemic stroke affecting the left hemisphere of my brain. He explained that the left hemisphere controls the right side of the body, which was why my right leg and right hand were not responding. He explained that the left hemisphere also houses the primary language center Broca's area, which was why I could not form words. He explained all of this to the figure behind the glass. The figure was my son, Derek. He was 42 years old, and he was holding a manila folder against his chest that I had never seen before. He was not crying. His jaw was tight, and his eyes were moving fast the way a man's eyes move when he is calculating something rather than grieving something. He had not come into the room yet. He had not asked Dr. Brennan if I was in pain. He had not asked if I could hear them talking. But he was listening very carefully to every word Dr. Brennan said, and the folder in his hand did not move. 4 days after the stroke, I could tell time by the shift changes. The day nurses came on at 7 in the morning with their coffee cups and their cheerful, practiced voices. The evening crew took over at 3, quieter, more efficient. And at 11 on Friday night, the floor went down to a skeleton staff, 1 registered nurse at the station, and a rotating roster of student nurses still learning which end of a stethoscope to point at a patient. Derek knew this. He had been visiting every day, sitting in the chair beside my bed for 20 minutes at a stretch, talking at me about the company, about cash flow, about contracts that needed attention. He never asked how I felt. He never asked if I was in pain. He talked the way a man talks when he is working up the nerve for something and needs to fill the space with noise while he gets there. On the 4th day, he came at 11:15 at night. He was not alone. Sandra came in first, Derek's wife, 38 years old, with sharp dark eyes, and the kind of careful, measured smile that never quite reached those eyes, no matter how long she held it. I had never fully trusted Sandra. There was something in the way she moved through a room, cataloging everything, pricing, everything that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up in a way I could never explain to anyone, least of all to Derek. 6 months ago, she had come to the house for Thanksgiving, and I had watched her walk through the living room with her eyes moving across every surface like she was conducting an appraisal. I had told myself I was being an old fool. I was not being an old fool. Behind Sandra came a man I had never seen before, short, heavy-set mid-50s, carrying a soft leather briefcase and wearing the expression of a man who was trying very hard to look like he was somewhere else entirely. He set the briefcase on the chair beside the door and began removing documents with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this particular task many times before. "Dad," Derek said. He pulled the chair close to my bed and sat down, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. His voice was low and careful. "I need you to listen to me. There are some things we have to take care of, for the company, while you're getting better." I looked at him. My chest was so tight it felt like someone had reached inside my ribs and was slowly closing a fist around my lungs. I wanted to say, "Derek, who is this man?" I wanted to say, "Derek, what is in that briefcase?" What came out of my mouth was a broken grinding sound that meant nothing to anyone in that room except me. Derek's jaw tightened. "I know, Dad. I know. Just listen, okay?" Sandra stepped forward and laid a stack of documents on the tray table beside my bed. She smoothed the top page with 2 fingers, a precise, unhurried gesture, and turned it to face me. Power of attorney. Full and unconditional. Cole Precision, manufacturing the Grand Rapids property, the Lakeshore Drive house, all 4 facilities. Every account, every asset. Everything I had spent 40 years building transferred into Derek's name in one clean motion. My right hand was useless. My right leg was useless. But my left hand gripped the bed rail so hard the knuckles went white, and my whole arm began to shake. I shook my head, hard as I could manage. "Dad." Derek leaned closer. He lowered his voice to something barely above a whisper, and what came into his eyes in that moment was not grief and was not love, and was not even the ordinary guilt of a man doing something he knew was wrong. It was something colder than all of those things. "Sign it. If you don't sign it today, I will take Max to the vet, first thing tomorrow morning, and I will have him put down. Do you understand me? And then I'm going to come back here, and I'm going to ask the night nurse to remove your breathing support. You're on a voluntary assist, Dad. All it takes is one signature from next of kin." The room went very small. I could hear the monitor beside my bed registering my heart rate, climbing the steady beep, accelerating into something ragged and desperate. I could feel the tears burning down the sides of my face into my hair, hot and humiliating, and I could not wipe them away because my right hand would not move and my left hand was shaking too badly to let go of the rail. Derek did not flinch. He watched me cry the way you watch rain run down a window, present detached, waiting for it to stop. Max, I managed. The word came out mangled, barely recognizable, but it was there. The one word I had been able to force out since I woke up in this bed. One syllable that meant everything. Then sign it, Derek said quietly. I turned my head toward the man with the briefcase. Gary Plotkin. I would learn his name later, much later, when it would matter in an entirely different way. He was standing near the door with the documents spread across his briefcase lid, a notary seal on a mechanical stamp beside his right hand. He was staring at the floor. His face was the color of old concrete. His right hand, I noticed, was trembling almost as badly as mine, but he did not move toward the door, and he did not say a single word. I looked at Sandra. She was watching me with those careful, measuring eyes, and there was something in her expression that was worse than Derek's coldness, a quiet, patient satisfaction, the look of a woman who had planned something for a very long time and was watching it arrive exactly on schedule. I looked at the documents on the tray table. I looked at the door. I looked at the ceiling where Eleanor's face was not, no matter how hard I looked for it. Then I reached out with my left hand, the only hand I had left, and I picked up the pen. My hand was shaking so badly I could barely hold it. The signature I produced looked nothing like the signature I had put on 40 years of contracts and payroll sheets and engineering certifications. It was the signature of a man whose hand could not stop trembling, whose tears were still running into his hair, who was signing away everything he had ever built in order to keep one gray-muzzled dog alive for one more day. Gary Plotkin stepped forward. He pressed his notary seal into the document without looking at my face. His hand was still shaking. He clicked the stamp, gathered the papers, and stepped back toward the door as fast as a man could move without actually running. Derek picked up the documents. He tapped them against the tray table to straighten the edges, a neat, satisfied gesture, and slid them into the folder he had been carrying since the night I was admitted. He stood up, buttoning his jacket. "Get some rest, Dad," he said. "We'll take care of everything." He walked out. Sandra followed him without a backward glance. Gary Plotkin was already in the hallway. I lay in the dark hospital room with the monitor still beeping too fast beside my head, and I pressed my left hand flat against my sternum, hard, trying to push back against the pain that was not medical and had no treatment and would not show up on any scan Dr. Brennan ordered in the morning. The machines in my head were still running, and somewhere across the city in a kennel, where Derek had been keeping him since the morning after my stroke, Max was still alive. That was the only thing I held on to. They came for me on a Saturday morning, not with a discharge planner, not with the social worker Dr. Brennan had mentioned on Thursday, the one who was supposed to sit down with me and walk through rehabilitation options and long-term care facilities in the Grand Rapids area. Derek had apparently called the hospital administrator Friday afternoon, just hours after leaving my room with the signed documents, and informed them that he had arranged private care for his father at a specialized neurological recovery center out of state. He had the paperwork. He had the POA. He had everything he needed, and the hospital had no legal reason to hold me. Nobody called Pete Garza. Nobody called the 3 men I had worked alongside for over 20 years who would have driven through a blizzard to sit beside my bed if they had known what was happening. Derek had already made the rounds. I pieced this together much later, one fragment at a time. He had called everyone who might ask questions and told them the same story. Dad is being transferred to a private facility downstate. The doctors say complete rest, no visitors for at least 6 weeks. I'll keep everyone updated. Nobody questioned it. Why would they? He was my son. He had the power of attorney. He had a smooth, reasonable voice and a folder full of legal documents. And grief does strange things to the people around it. It makes them want to believe the person standing in front of them has everything under control. The orderly who brought the wheelchair to my room that morning was a young kid, maybe 22, with kind eyes and a Pittsburgh Steelers lanyard on his badge. He helped me into the chair with genuine care, positioning my right leg carefully on the footrest, making sure I was settled before he released the brake. "You doing okay, Mr. Cole?" he asked. I looked at him. My throat burned with everything I needed to say. "This is wrong. Something is wrong. Please get Dr. Brennan. Please call the police. Please call anybody." And what came out was the same fractured, useless sound it always was. My left hand gripped the armrest of the wheelchair so hard the plastic creaked. The kid patted my shoulder. "It's okay," he said gently. "You're going somewhere. They're going to take real good care of you." He had no idea. He was 22 years old, and he had no idea, and it was not his fault, and I have never blamed him for a single second of what came after. Derek was waiting at the curb with a truck I had never seen before. A rental, a white Ford F-250 with commercial plates and a flatbed that had been used to haul equipment. Not a medical transport. Not a vehicle with any accommodation for a man who could not walk without assistance. Just a work truck idling at the curb on a gray March morning, with exhaust rising white into the cold air. And beside Derek, straining against a leash, his whole back end wagging with a desperate, frantic joy that broke something open in my chest, was Max. Max hit the end of the leash so hard, he nearly pulled Derek off his feet. He lunged toward the wheelchair, both front paws coming up onto the footrest, his big gray-muzzled face pushing into my lap, his whole body shaking with the effort of trying to get as close to me as physically possible. A sound came out of him, not a bark, not a whine, but something between the two, a long, broken note of pure relief that I felt in my back teeth. I got my left hand into the thick fur at the back of his neck, and I held on. My eyes burned so badly I could not see clearly. My throat was working around something I could not say and could not swallow and could not get rid of. I pressed my face into the top of Max's head, and I breathed him in that particular smell of dog and grass and the cedar shavings they used at the kennel. And I held on to him the way a man holds on to the last solid thing in a world that has come apart at the seams. "All right," Derek said flatly. "Let's go." The drive north took 2 hours and 11 minutes. I know because I watched the clock on the truck dashboard the entire way, cataloging every mile marker, memorizing the route, the way an engineer memorizes a system, methodically, completely storing every detail in the part of my brain that Derek could not touch and could not sign away and could not take from me no matter what he put in front of a notary. We passed through Grand Rapids and out the other side, heading north on US 131 into the flat, bare Michigan countryside. The fields on either side were still frozen, the soil gray-brown and packed hard, the tree lines stripped bare. Max sat pressed against my left side in the back seat, his head in my lap, his breathing slow and warm against my leg. Derek did not speak for the entire drive. Not one word. He drove with both hands on the wheel and his jaw set, and his eyes fixed on the road ahead, and the silence in that truck was not the silence of a man who was grieving or conflicted or struggling with what he was doing. It was the silence of a man who had made his decision and was executing it and had nothing left to say about it. We turned off the highway onto a county road, then off the county road onto a gravel track that ran between two stands of bare oak trees. The truck slowed. I looked through the windshield and saw it for the first time. The farmhouse had been in my family for 3 generations. My grandfather had built it by hand in 1931, working with two neighbors and whatever timber he could source from the back 40. My father had grown up in it. I had spent summers there as a boy, running through fields that were full and productive and alive with the sound of machinery and livestock. The fields were empty now. The fences were down in 3 places I could see from the truck. The farmhouse itself sat at the end of the gravel track like something that had given up the porch, sagging 2 windows on the upper floor, dark with broken panes, the whole structure wearing the gray, exhausted look of a building that had not been inhabited in a very long time. Derek stopped the truck. He got out. He opened the back door and unclipped Max's leash, and Max dropped to the frozen ground and pressed immediately against my leg as Derek helped me into the rusted wheelchair that had been loaded in the truck bed, a chair so old the right wheel stuck slightly on every rotation. Derek set my bag on the ground beside the chair. A single canvas duffel. 3 changes of clothes, my medication, and nothing else. "The place is yours," Derek said. He was not looking at me. He was looking at the farmhouse. "Property taxes are paid through the year. After that, not my problem." He walked back to the truck. He opened the driver's door. His hand was on the frame, and for one moment, one single moment, he paused and turned his head, and I thought he was going to say something human, something that acknowledged 40 years of a man raising his son and building something from nothing and loving him even when it was hard. "Take care of yourself, Dad," Derek said. He got in the truck. He started the engine. He drove back down the gravel track without looking in the rearview mirror once. What I would piece together later, one fragment at a time, was how completely Derek had sealed every exit. He had called Dr. Brennan's office the following week and informed them that his father had been transferred to a private neurological facility in Ohio. A real facility, one he had researched by name, one whose staff would confirm nothing to outside callers due to patient privacy law. He had sent Pete Garza a card handwritten in an imitation of my handwriting, close enough to pass a casual inspection, saying I needed complete rest and would be in touch when I was stronger. He had set up an email auto-reply on my business account, stating I was on medical leave with limited communication. He had told the family attorney, the accountant, and the insurance broker the same story: private facility, doctor's orders, no visitors. Nobody had reason to disbelieve a son holding a legal power of attorney and speaking in a calm, reasonable voice. Grief makes people want to believe the person in front of them has everything under control. Derek had understood this about people his entire life, and he had used it with the precision of a man who had been planning for a long time. I sat in a rusted wheelchair on frozen ground and watched the truck disappear around the bend in the oak trees. The wind came across the empty field and hit me full in the face, sharp and mean and smelling of ice. Max pressed his entire body against the side of the wheelchair, his shoulder against my knee, his weight solid and warm and real. I looked at the farmhouse. I looked at the broken windows and the sagging porch and the door that was hanging slightly off its top hinge. I looked at the gray sky above it, heavy with the particular look of a Michigan sky that is deciding whether to snow. Then I looked down at my left hand, the only hand I had, and I started to think. The temperature dropped fast once the sun went down. I had grown up in Michigan. I knew exactly what a March night in Osceola County felt like, the kind of cold that did not ease into you gradually, but hit you all at once like a door slamming open. By the time I got the wheelchair through the farmhouse door, my left hand was numb from gripping the wheel, and my breath was coming out in hard white clouds that dissolved into the dark. The farmhouse was worse inside than outside. 2 of the ground floor windows were cracked, and the wind moved through the gaps with a thin, mean persistence that made the whole structure feel less like shelter and more like a slightly less open version of the field outside. The floorboards were warped. The ceiling in the front room had a brown water stain the size of a card table spreading out from the corner. The kitchen range was a cast iron unit from another decade, cold and dead. I wheeled through every room I could access on the ground floor, running my left hand along walls, opening doors, pulling at cabinet handles. An engineer does not panic. An engineer assesses. I had one functional hand, one functional leg, no voice, no phone, no food, and the temperature outside was heading toward 0. I found 3 things worth having. A wool horse blanket in the back of a hall closet stiff with age but intact. Half a box of wooden matches on the kitchen shelf dry. And in the fireplace in the front room, enough old ash to tell me the flue was clear. I spent 40 minutes getting a fire going. 40 minutes of fumbling with one hand, dropping matches, knocking the kindling over twice my fingers, shaking so badly I could barely strike a flame. Max sat beside me the entire time, his shoulder pressed against my knee, watching my face with those gold eyes that never looked away. When the fire finally caught a small, stubborn flame working its way up through a nest of wood shavings I had scraped from a broken chair leg, I pressed my left hand flat on the floor and leaned my forehead down to meet it. "Okay," I said. The word came out wrong, twisted, barely recognizable, but it came out. Max put his chin on my knee. The fire died at 2 in the morning. I woke to cold so complete it felt structural, like the cold had become part of the building. My right side was useless in the warmth. In this temperature, it was something worse, a dead weight pulling heat out of me faster than my body could replace it. My teeth were knocking together in a way I could not control, and my left hand, when I tried to flex it, responded with a slow, painful reluctance that frightened me. Then Max moved. He had been lying beside me on the floor. Now he stood turned twice and lay down directly on top of me, all 92 pounds of him stretching his full length across my chest and stomach, his chin dropping onto my shoulder, his breath warm against my neck. His body heat hit me like a furnace door opening. I felt it move through my shirt and into my sternum and down into my arms. I got my left hand into his fur and I held on. I do not know how long we lay there. Long enough for my teeth to stop knocking. Long enough for feeling to come back into my left hand in a wave of painful pins and needles that made me grunt out loud. Long enough for the gray light of a Michigan morning to start coming through the cracked windows. When it was light enough to see, Max lifted his head. He looked at me for a long moment, that direct, clear-eyed look that dogs give you when they have decided something. Then he stood up and walked to the window. He licked the condensation off the glass. Slow, patient licks, drinking what little moisture had collected there overnight because there was nothing else. My chest cracked open. Not from pain, not from cold, from something much harder to name, the sight of this animal who had slept on a dog bed in a heated house his entire life, who had never gone hungry for a single day, standing in a broken-down farmhouse, licking frost off a window, because my son had left us both here to die. Max. The word tore out of me ragged and wrong, but it was his name and he knew it. He turned from the window and looked at me, his tail moving once. My jaw tightened. My left hand closed into a fist on the floor. Derek had taken my company. He had taken my house, my accounts, my name on every document that mattered. He had taken my voice and he had taken my legs, and he had left me in the cold to wait for the end. But he had not taken the mind that built all of it. And as long as that mind was still running, I was not done. I looked around the farmhouse, the warped floors, the broken windows, the dead kitchen range, the cracked walls. I looked at all of it the way I had looked at that first empty bay in the Grand Rapids Industrial Park 41 years ago, when I had nothing but a rented space and a set of tools and an absolute refusal to accept the situation in front of me as permanent. I looked at my left hand. Then I started to work. An engineer does not see a broken thing. He sees a system waiting to be understood. I spent the first full day inside the farmhouse doing nothing but looking. Not moving, not attempting repairs, not burning energy I did not have on actions I had not fully planned. I sat in the wheelchair beside the window, where the morning light came in at the best angle, and I looked at everything within my line of sight, the way I had looked at broken machinery my entire career, methodically, without emotion, cataloging what was present and what was missing and what could be made to work. The farmhouse had good bones. My grandfather had built it to last, and underneath the warped floors and broken windows and 30 years of neglect, the structural integrity was sound. The fireplace drew cleanly once I cleared the ash blockage at the damper. The kitchen range was cast iron old, but cast iron does not die, it only gets cold. The roof had held. The walls were plumb. What I did not have was food. My medication had run out by the end of the second week, the anticoagulants, the blood pressure pills Derek had packed without thinking twice about whether they would last. I knew what stopping them meant for a man who had just survived an ischemic stroke. I also knew I had no way to get more, and a man who is busy surviving does not have the luxury of worrying about probability. I filed the risk away in the same place I filed everything I could not currently fix, and I kept moving. Max solved part of that problem himself, the way he had always solved problems directly, and without any apparent doubt that the solution existed. On the second morning, he pushed through the gap in the back door, where the weather stripping had rotted away, and disappeared into the tree line for 40 minutes. He came back with a rabbit, dropped it at the base of my wheelchair, with the satisfied expression of an animal who has completed a task to his own high standards, and looked up at me expectantly. "Good boy," I told him. The words came out broken and too slow, but he wagged at them anyway. I used the pocket knife I always kept clipped inside my jacket, 40 years of habit, the same 3-inch Victorinox my father had given me when I was 16 to dress the rabbit with one hand. It took longer than I wanted. My technique was ugly, but the result was the same. That was the week I learned that a man can do most things with one hand if he stops grieving the one he has lost. On the fourth day, I found the root cellar. I had been working my way around the perimeter of the farmhouse in the wheelchair, running my hand along the foundation, checking for structural damage. On the north side, half hidden under a collapsed section of the porch, overhang and covered by a winter's worth of dead leaves and frozen soil, I found the cellar door, heavy timber planks on iron hinges, the kind of construction my grandfather's generation did not question and did not cut corners on. Getting it open with one functional hand took the better part of an hour. The hinges had rusted solid. I used a length of iron pipe I found in the collapsed porch debris as a lever, working it slowly, repositioning after every inch of movement, stopping twice when my arm gave out from the sustained effort. Max sat beside me and watched with his ears forward, and his head tilted the way he always watched when I was working on something that required patience. "Don't look at me like that," I told him. "I've got it." He made a small sound in his throat that managed to convey significant skepticism. The door gave on the 53rd attempt. I counted. The root cellar was roughly 8 feet square and 5 feet deep, dug into the clay soil and lined with rough-cut limestone blocks. The air that came up was cold and mineral and completely dry, the particular smell of a sealed underground space that has been maintaining its own climate for decades without any help from anyone above ground. And on the wooden shelving along 3 walls, still sealed, still intact, were my grandfather's stores. Mason jars of salted pork, wax-sealed crocks of lard, tins of dried beans and split peas and corn, their lids crimped down tight with a hand tool that had probably not been manufactured since 1970. A burlap sack of dried apple rings, hard as leather, but structurally sound. 2 quarts of maple syrup, crystallized, but usable. My throat tightened so badly I had to stop moving for a moment, not from relief. From something older and harder to name, the feeling of a man reaching across 50 years and finding that his grandfather had, without knowing it, left him exactly what he needed. The old man had put up these stores the way he put up everything, completely carefully built to outlast him. They had outlasted him by decades, and now they were going to outlast Derek's plan to leave me here with nothing. I lowered myself out of the wheelchair and down the cellar steps one at a time on my good leg, holding the timber frame moving slowly and without any margin for error. Max whined at the top of the steps, unhappy about the descent, his nails clicking anxiously on the boards above me. "Stay," I told him. "I'll be right back." I came back up with 4 mason jars and a tin of dried beans balanced against my chest. My arm was shaking from the effort of managing the stairs one-handed. My knee was bruised from where I had slipped on the 3rd step and caught myself against the limestone wall. I set the jars on the kitchen floor and looked at them for a long moment. Then I looked at Max, who was looking at the jars with his ears up and his nose working. "We're going to be fine," I told him. The words came out slow and imperfect, and nothing like the voice I used to have. But they came out. And sitting on the cold kitchen floor of my grandfather's farmhouse with 4 mason jars of salted pork and a tin of dried beans, I believed them. The first warm day of April brought mud, and the mud brought Ruth McAllister. I heard her truck before I saw it, a diesel engine with a slight skip in the idle that told me the number 3 injector was running lean, the kind of issue you could ignore for another 10,000 miles if you wanted to, or fix in 40 minutes if you knew what you were doing. It came up the gravel track slowly, the way a person drives when they are not sure what they are going to find at the end of the road. I was in the kitchen working on the cast iron range with a wire brush I had made from stripping a section of old fence wire when I heard the truck door close. Max's head came up from the floor. His ears went forward. His tail moved once, not a warning wag, a curious one. Boots on the porch steps. A knock, practical and unhesitating, the knock of someone who expects an answer. I did not move. I had no way to call out. No way to say, "Come in" or "Go away," and the sudden realization that a stranger was on the other side of that door, someone who might call the county, might call Derek, might set something in motion I could not control, sent a cold spike of anxiety straight through my chest. The door opened anyway. She was tall for a woman her age, maybe 5'8", with short gray hair, and the kind of face that had been outdoors in Michigan weather for 6 decades and had stopped arguing with it. She wore a canvas barn jacket over a flannel shirt and carried a large pot in both hands that smelled even from across the kitchen like chicken broth and thyme. She looked at me the way I had been looked at by exactly 2 kinds of people since the stroke, with pity, or with the clinical assessment of someone who has seen broken bodies before and is already calculating what can be salvaged. Ruth McAllister was the second kind. Her eyes moved across me once wheelchair right leg, the way my right hand sat useless in my lap, and then she walked to the kitchen counter and set the pot down like she had been putting pots on that counter her entire life. "Ruth McAllister," she said, turning to face me. "I've got the farm 3 miles east. I saw smoke coming from this place 2 weeks ago, and I've been meaning to come by." She paused. "You look like you've had a rough winter." I opened my mouth. The sound that came out made her expression shift, not to pity, but to a focused, professional attention that I recognized from the ICU nurses, who had been the most competent ones on the floor. "Stroke," she said. It was not a question. I nodded. "Left hemisphere. Broca's area." She said it matter-of-factly, the way someone states a mechanical diagnosis. Your comprehension is intact. You understand everything I'm saying. I nodded again. Good, she said. Then I won't talk to you like you don't. She pulled a kitchen chair out from the table and sat down, not close enough to crowd me, not far enough to be polite about it. I'm going to ask you one question, and I need an honest answer. Do you want me to call Adult Protective Services? My chest tightened. I shook my head. Hard. Okay, Ruth said without argument, without the wounded look people gave you when they thought you were making the wrong choice. That's your call to make. You've got a working brain, and you made it. I won't call. She leaned forward slightly, her elbows on her knees. But I'm going to come back tomorrow, and the day after that, and you don't get a vote on that part. From under the kitchen table, Max had been conducting his own evaluation. He emerged, now walked directly to Ruth, and put his nose against her knee with the particular focus of an animal running a diagnostic. Ruth looked down at him. German Shepherd, she said. 8, maybe 9 years old. Hip is a little stiff on the left side. She reached down and scratched behind his ear with the confidence of someone who had handled large animals her entire life. Max's eyes went half-closed with pleasure. He the reason you're still alive? Ruth asked, looking up at me. I held her gaze and nodded once, and something moved through my chest that I had not felt since Eleanor, the specific ache of being seen accurately by another person. Ruth stood up and moved the pot to the range. Cast iron, she said, looking at the stove approvingly. My grandmother had one of these. Once you get it hot, it holds heat all day. She looked at the wire brush I had been using on the burner grates. You've been cleaning it. I spread my left hand in a gesture that meant obviously. A sound came out of Ruth that surprised me, a short, genuine laugh, the kind that escapes before a person decides whether to let it. All right, she said. I'll bring a proper wire brush next time, and some seasoning oil. She picked up her jacket from the chair. At the door, she stopped and looked back at me, and her expression had shifted into something more direct. You built machines your whole life, she said. I know who you are, Mr. Cole. I read about you in the Grand Rapids Press 7-8 years back. Big profile. Man who built Cole Precision from nothing. She paused. You know how to fix broken things. She walked out before I could figure out what my face was doing. Max trotted to the door and watched her truck back down the gravel track, his tail moving in a slow, satisfied arc. Then he turned and looked at me with an expression that managed to convey with no ambiguity whatsoever that he approved of this development and considered the matter settled. I looked at the pot of soup on the range. I looked at the door. I looked at my left hand. Then, for the first time since March the 9th, I felt something shift in my chest that was not grief and was not rage. It was something quieter and more durable than either one. It felt like the first day of spring. Ruth came every afternoon at 2 o'clock. Not sometimes. Not when the weather was good. Every afternoon, pulling up the gravel track in that diesel truck with the lean injector carrying whatever she had decided I needed that day. Soup, cornbread, a bag of dried beans, once an entire smoked ham wrapped in butcher paper that she set on the kitchen table without ceremony and said, "Don't argue." I had not argued. I was getting better at accepting help the way you get better at anything you practice enough. It was Ruth who told me 3 weeks into April that she wanted to try something. I worked neuro rehab for 6 years before I moved to general, she said, pulling her chair up across from mine in the kitchen. Broca's aphasia, what you have, it doesn't always respond to traditional speech exercises. Trying to force words directly can actually reinforce the block. She looked at me steadily. But music is processed in a different part of the brain. The right hemisphere, which in your case is completely intact. I looked at her. My expression said, "Get to the point." I want you to hum, Ruth said. Just hum. No words, no attempts at syllables. Pick a tune you know and hum it. I stared at her. I know how that sounds, she said, and her tone carried exactly zero apology for how it sounded. Do it anyway. What followed was the most humiliating 3 weeks of my life, including the weeks I had spent lying on a farmhouse floor being kept alive by a dog. Ruth would sit across from me with a patience that I found both deeply reassuring and quietly infuriating, and she would hum a bar of something, an old hymn, a country melody. Once the University of Michigan fight song, which I suspected she chose specifically to irritate me, and I would attempt to replicate it. What came out of me in those first sessions was not humming. It was a series of strangled, grinding sounds that bore no relationship to music or language or any form of human communication I was familiar with. I slammed my left hand on the table more than once. Again, Ruth would say every time without flinching. I can't. The words never came out right. The consonants collapsed. The vowels ran together. You can, Ruth said. Your brain knows how. We're just finding a different road to the same place. Again. Max would lie under the table during these sessions with his chin on his front paws, watching my face with an expression of concerned concentration, as if he understood that something important was being attempted, and he was prepared to provide moral support for as long as it took. By mid-May, I could hum a recognizable melody. It was not pretty. Ruth said it sounded like a screen door in a high wind, and the laugh that surprised me out of my chest at that description was the first real laugh I had produced since March the 9th. It felt strange in my lungs, rusty like a machine that had been sitting idle, but it felt like something. We began working on consonants through the melodies, attaching sounds to notes, letting the musical rhythm carry the shape of the word, rather than forcing the word directly. M sounds first, because they required the least complex mouth positioning. Then vowels, then N, then simple combinations. It was slow. It was painful in a way that had nothing to do with physical sensation. It was the pain of a man who had commanded factory floors and negotiated contracts and raised his voice over the sound of industrial machinery for 40 years, reduced to sitting at a kitchen table trying to make his mouth produce the letter M on command. Then came the afternoon in late June when it happened. Ruth had stepped outside to check on her truck. She thought she heard something in the engine and had asked me to listen for it when she started it up because she trusted my ear more than her own on mechanical matters. Max and I were alone in the kitchen. He had moved out from under the table and was sitting directly in front of my wheelchair, looking up at me with those gold eyes that had watched me through every worst moment of the past 4 months. I looked at him. The afternoon light came through the kitchen window and caught the gray in his muzzle and the particular amber depth of his eyes, and something moved through my chest, a wave of feeling so complete it was almost physical gratitude and grief and love all arriving at the same moment. My mouth opened. M. The sound came out, uncertain, feeling its way forward. M-A. Max's ears went straight up. M-A-X. It came out broken. The X at the end was barely there, more breath than consonant. But it was 3 distinct sounds in the correct sequence, and they meant something, and the animal sitting in front of me heard them and knew exactly what they were. Max stood up so fast, the chair behind him scraped the floor. He put both front paws on my knees and pushed his face into my chest, his whole back end moving a sound coming out of him that was half whine and half something I had no word for, a vocalization of pure, relieved joy that shook his entire body. I got my left hand into the fur at the back of his neck, and I held on my face pressed into the top of his head, my eyes burning so badly I could not see the kitchen around me. The screen door opened. Ruth came back in. She looked at the two of us. She looked at my face, and She pulled out her chair, sat down, and became very interested in something on the table in front of her. For a long moment, her jaw working slightly, her eyes bright. "Well," she said finally, her voice coming out rougher than usual. "Try it again." "Max," I said, clearer this time, both syllables, the X landing properly at the end. Ruth nodded once briskly the way she did when something met her standard. "Good," she said. Again. "Max," I said again. And this time it sounded like me. The voice came back first. The legs were going to take longer. I had accepted this with the same logic. I applied to any engineering problem. Identify the constraint, work within it, find the workaround. My right leg was not dead. The neurologist had been clear about that in the ICU, in the careful language doctors use when they are managing expectations without closing doors. The motor pathway was damaged, not severed. With sustained effort and the right mechanical support function could return. Partially. Possibly more than partially. Nobody was making promises. I did not need promises. I needed materials. The farm had a storage barn behind the main house that I had not fully explored. In July, after my voice had come back enough to manage short sentences, I asked Ruth to push me out there in the wheelchair and leave me alone for the afternoon. "Leave you alone," Ruth repeated in the tone she used when she was deciding whether to argue. "I need to think when," I told her. "Can't think with someone watching me." She gave me a look that suggested she found this characteristically difficult, but not entirely unreasonable, and she pushed me to the barn door and went back to the house without another word. The barn was a treasure, not in any way that would have meant anything to anyone who had not spent 40 years working with metal and mechanical systems. But to me, standing at the edge of what was available and calculating what was possible, it was extraordinary. 3 sets of iron door hinges, heavy gauge, the kind they stopped manufacturing in the 1960s. A coil of braided steel cable, stiff with age but structurally sound. Lengths of hardwood dowel. A hand drill with a full set of bits. Leather harness straps from a set of horse tack, hanging on the far wall, dry but intact. And in the corner, a wooden block and tackle pulley system, the kind of simple rope and wheel mechanical advantage device that my grandfather's generation used for everything from lifting engine blocks to raising roof beams. I sat in that barn for 4 hours. I did not touch anything. I looked. I calculated. I built the design in my head the way I had built every design in my head for 40 years, starting with the load requirements, working through the mechanical constraints, identifying the failure points before I committed to a direction. What I needed was a leg brace, not a medical device, not something from a catalog, but a custom mechanical orthotic that would hold my right knee and ankle in correct alignment, distribute my weight properly across the compromised joint, and give me enough stability to attempt weight bearing. I needed it to be adjustable because my condition was not static. And I needed to be able to make it with one functional hand and whatever was in this barn. I started building the following morning. Ruth watched me work the first day without saying anything, which was its own form of respect. She brought coffee at 10 and set it on the workbench without interrupting. Max lay in the barn doorway in the sun, monitoring the situation with the patient authority of an animal who has decided his job is to observe and be available. The work was slow and often ugly. Drilling through hardwood with one hand required clamping the piece with my knees and my body weight in ways that were creative and occasionally painful. Bending the iron hinges to the angles I needed meant heating them in the wood stove and working fast before they cooled, which meant multiple attempts and more than a few burns on my left hand that Ruth dressed without comment, and I did not mention again. "You're going to tell me what this is," Ruth said on the 3rd day, watching me rivet 2 hinge plates together with a technique I had invented on the spot. "Leg brace," I said. Ruth was quiet for a moment. Custom orthotic. Custom orthotic, I agreed. Built from barn hardware. Best available materials, I said. She made a sound that was not quite a laugh, but was adjacent to one. You're either the most resourceful man I've ever met, she said, or the most stubborn. Both, I said, usually at the same time. The brace took 3 weeks to build and 2 more weeks to get right. The first version put too much lateral pressure on the knee joint. I felt it wrong on the first attempt at weight bearing and took it apart the same afternoon. The second version was better, but the leather strapping slipped under load. The third version with the straps doubled and riveted at the stress points held. I hung the block and tackle from the main crossbeam of the barn and rigged a chest harness from the remaining leather. Then, on a Tuesday morning in late September, with Max sitting 3 feet away, watching me with his ears forward, and Ruth standing in the barn doorway, with her arms crossed and her jaw set, I hauled myself upright for the first time in 6 months. My right leg shook. The brace held. My left leg took most of the weight and screamed about it. I stood there for 11 seconds before my left knee buckled and I went down, catching myself on the pulley rope before I hit the ground. Again, I said before Ruth could speak. Arthur. Again, I said. I went up and down 17 times that morning. By the end, I was soaked through my shirt, and my left arm was trembling so badly I could barely grip the rope. But the last time I came down because I chose to, not because I had to. By October, I was walking the length of the barn with the brace and a wooden staff I had cut from a straight-grained ash sapling at the tree line. Not well, not fast. With a gait that Ruth described with characteristic directness as looking like a man walking on a boat deck in a mild chop. It'll improve, I told her. I know it will, she said. And the way she said it, not as encouragement but as a statement of observed fact, was worth more to me than any amount of carefully managed medical optimism. On the last day of October, I wheeled the old wheelchair out of the barn and left it against the fence post at the edge of the property. I walked back to the house. The Ford had been sitting in the back lot since before I was born. Not literally, it was a 1987 F-250, which made it younger than me by 17 years, but it had the particular stillness of a vehicle that had given up on being useful and was waiting patiently to be hauled away for scrap. Both rear tires were flat. The hood was sprung on the left hinge. Rust had worked its way into the wheel wells and up along the rocker panels in the creeping patient way rust operates in Michigan, where the road salt and the freeze-thaw cycles team up every winter to eat metal alive. I stood beside it on a cold November morning, with my staff in my left hand and Max at my heel, and I looked at it the way I had looked at that barn full of hardware in July, not as a broken thing, but as a system with specific diagnosable problems that had specific achievable solutions. You think you can fix that? Ruth said from behind me. It was not quite a question. I know I can fix that, I said. My speech was not perfect. Some consonants still gave me trouble, and I lost words occasionally reaching for them and finding empty space where they should have been. But the voice was mine again, low and deliberate, and carrying the particular weight of a man who did not speak unless he had something worth saying. Ruth looked at the truck. She looked at me. What do you need? Time, I said. And your truck to make one run into Evart for parts. She drove me into Evart the following Saturday. I had made a list written left-handed which still looked like the work of a man writing in an earthquake, but was legible of every component I needed to assess before I could determine what was salvageable and what needed replacing. Fuel pump, belts, radiator hoses, points and condenser for the ignition, a set of valve cover gaskets, 2 inner tubes for the rear tires because the sidewalls looked sound enough to save. The man behind the counter at the auto parts store looked at my list, looked at my cane, looked at my right hand that still did not move the way I wanted it to, and said carefully, "You doing this work yourself?" "Yes," I said. He looked at the list again. "This is an old-school tune-up. Points ignition. Most guys your age bring it to a shop." "Most guys my age," I said, "did not build a precision manufacturing company from a rented bay in Grand Rapids." He blinked. Then he started pulling parts. The repair took 3 weeks, working 2 to 3 hours a day before my stamina gave out. I developed techniques bracing components against my knee to hold them while my left hand worked, using my teeth to hold a wrench steady while I torqued a bolt with my one good hand, building small wooden jigs to substitute for the second hand I did not currently have. It was slow. It was frequently maddening. 3 times I dropped a component into the engine bay and had to fish it out with a length of bent wire, cursing in a way that made Max leave the barn and wait outside until I had finished. But the knowledge was still there. Every bit of it. 40 years of mechanical understanding sitting intact in the undamaged half of my brain patient, and complete waiting for my hands to catch up. In the weeks before the repair was finished, Ruth had driven me to the Secretary of State office in Evart for the medical clearance evaluation, a behind-the-wheel assessment required for any driver following a neurological event in Michigan. The examiner had watched me operate a vehicle. With the hand controls Ruth had helped me identify, asked me to parallel park between 2 orange cones, and signed the reinstatement form without comment. On a gray Tuesday in late November, I climbed into the driver's seat, adjusted the staff behind the seat, looked at Max in the passenger seat beside me, and turned the key. The engine caught on the second try. It ran rough for 30 seconds, while the fuel system cleared, then smoothed out into a steady idle that sounded to my ear exactly like it was supposed to sound. Max looked at the dashboard. He looked at me. His tail moved twice against the bench seat with a slow, satisfied thump. "I know," I said. "Don't make a big deal of it." I began driving the county roads of Osceola County the following week, stopping at farms I had identified from Ruth's directions, offering to look at whatever machinery was giving trouble. Word moved through rural communities the way it always had, slowly at first, then faster than you expected. The old man with the cane and the German shepherd who could fix anything. A seized baler drive shaft here. A tractor PTO that had stopped engaging there. A grain auger with a bearing that had been running bad for 2 seasons because the nearest equipment dealer was 40 minutes away and the repair estimate was more than the farmer wanted to spend. I charged nothing this first month. After that, I charged what the work was worth, which was less than a shop, but more than nothing. And I took payment in whatever form was available, cash when there was cash. A side of beef in October. 2 cords of seasoned firewood that heated the farmhouse through the following winter. The year that followed settled into a rhythm I had not expected to find in a place I had expected to die in. I fixed machines during the day. Ruth came in the afternoon. Max ran the perimeter of the property each morning like he was conducting an inspection and filing a report. For 12 months, I fixed things and I waited. I was good at both. Then one evening in late November of the second year, I was driving back from a farm call on the county road when the radio caught a signal out of Grand Rapids clearly enough to make out words. A business segment. A reporter's voice reading from what sounded like a press release. Cole Precision Manufacturing had secured a new distribution contract. Derek Cole, chief executive, expressed confidence in the company's direction. I reached over and turned the radio off. My hand was steady. My jaw was tight. Outside the windshield, the flat Michigan fields stretched away into the dark on both sides of the road, bare and frozen and patient. I drove the rest of the way home without the radio. There would be a time for Derek Cole. That time was not yet. But it was coming, and I had spent 12 months making sure I would be ready for it when it arrived. No. Arthur had survived 2 winters alone, with nothing but a dog and a broken body. He had rebuilt his voice, his legs, and his will from scraps. But fate still had one more move to make, and it was coming down a snowy road in the dark. Before I take you there, type "still here" in the comments so I know you are with me. Every comment means the world. A gentle reminder: portions of this story include fictional elements woven in for depth and impact. If that is not something you wish to continue with, this is a good moment to step away, no hard feelings. The storm came in fast, the way December storms always did in northern Michigan. No warning, no gradual buildup, just a wall of wind and snow that dropped visibility to 30 yards in 20 minutes flat. I had been out to a farm 6 miles east, looking at a hydraulic lift on an old John Deere that had been bleeding fluid since September. The repair had taken longer than expected, a cracked seal in the lift cylinder, which required pulling the cylinder entirely and pressing a new seal with a makeshift press I built from a C-clamp and a section of iron pipe, and by the time I got back in the Ford and headed west on the county road, the storm had arrived with its full intention. Max had his nose against the passenger window, watching the snow move sideways through the headlights. His breath fogged the glass in a slow, rhythmic pulse. "I see it," I told him. He looked at me. I said, "I see it." The lights appeared through the snow about a quarter mile ahead, not moving, which meant trouble. As I got closer, I made out the shape: a long, low vehicle pulled to the shoulder, its hazard lights blinking orange through the white. 4 figures stood around it in heavy coats, 2 of them hunched over a laptop that was catching snow on its screen, one on a phone, one just standing with his hands in his pockets, looking at the engine like it had personally offended him. I pulled the Ford up behind them and stepped out into the storm. The car was a 1962 Rolls-Royce Silver Cloud II, in a dark burgundy that the snow was doing its best to obscure. Even in a blizzard in the dark on a county road in Osceola County, Michigan, it was an extraordinary piece of machinery, long and low, and built with the particular confidence of an era when engineers designed cars to last 50 years and meant it. The hood was up. The 4 men looked at me as I came toward them through the snow with my staff and my shepherd. "She just died," the nearest one said. He was young, maybe 30, with the look of someone who understood computers very well, and internal combustion engines not at all. "We've run full diagnostics twice. The system isn't showing any fault codes." "It won't," I said. He blinked. "Sorry, that engine was built in 1962, I said, moving past him toward the open hood. "It has no computer, no sensors, no fault codes. Your diagnostic software is looking for a conversation that engine doesn't know how to have." I heard someone behind me say something in a low voice. I was not paying attention. I was looking at the engine. The Silver Cloud II ran a 6.2-liter V8, a pushrod engine of considerable elegance designed by a team of engineers who believed that mechanical systems should be understandable by the human beings responsible for maintaining them. I had studied this engine from a technical manual 30 years ago, the way I studied every significant piece of machinery I encountered, because knowledge did not expire, and you never knew when you would need it. I ran my left hand along the intake manifold. Cold, colder than it should be for an engine that had been running recently. I moved to the carburetor, a twin SU unit, and pressed 2 fingers against the fuel bowl. Then I picked up the short, flathead screwdriver I always kept in my jacket pocket, the same pocket the Victorinox lived in, and tapped it gently against the accelerator pump housing. The sound it made told me everything. "Accelerator pump diaphragm," I said. "The fuel in the pump bowl has gelled in this temperature. The diaphragm is stuck open, which means the engine flooded on the last restart attempt, and then the residual fuel iced in the venturi." I found the mixture screw on the primary carburetor and turned it out a quarter turn. Then I located the small pressure relief valve on the fuel line a manual valve because 1962 engineers trusted manual valves and cracked it open for 3 seconds to bleed the pressure before closing it again. Try it now. Nobody moved. I straightened up and looked at the 4 men. They were staring at me. Start the car, I said. The man nearest the driver's door, older than the others, maybe 50, with the careful posture of someone who spent a lot of time being in charge, moved to the door and leaned in. The starter turned. The engine caught on the 3rd rotation, settled into a rough idle for 10 seconds, while the carburetor cleared, then smoothed into the deep, resonant purr of a perfectly engineered V8 that had been waiting patiently for someone who understood it. The 4 men looked at each other. Max sat down beside my left foot in the snow and looked up at me with the expression he reserved for moments he considered self-explanatory. The older man stepped out of the car and walked toward me. He was tall, broad across the shoulders, with white hair cut short and eyes that were doing the same thing. Eyes do when a face is trying to catch up with something the brain has already figured out. He was wearing a cashmere overcoat that cost more than the Ford I had driven here, and he moved through the blizzard with the absolute unhurried confidence of a man who had not been in a hurry since sometime in the 1980s. He stopped 3 feet from me. He looked at my face, he looked at my staff, he looked at Max. "Arthur Cole," Raymond Whitfield said. His voice was deep and unhurried, the voice of a man who had spent 75 years deciding that the world could wait for him to finish his sentence. "I have been looking for you for 2 years. My chest tightened in a way that had nothing to do with the cold. "You found the wrong address," I said. Something shifted in Raymond's expression, not surprise but recognition, the look of a man who has identified something he was searching for. "My engineers have been running diagnostics on that car for 90 minutes, he said. "You fixed it in 4 minutes with a flathead screwdriver." 3 minutes, I said. "I spent 1 minute explaining it to your engineers." Raymond Whitfield looked at me for a long moment. The snow came down between us. Max stood up from beside the stove and moved to stand directly in front of me, his big head dropping to rest on my knee, his weight grounding and warm and completely certain of itself. "Get in the car," Raymond said. "Both of you. There is a conversation we need to have, and I would prefer to have it somewhere where I cannot feel my ears freezing." I looked at the Rolls-Royce. I looked at Raymond Whitfield, who was one of the wealthiest men in American manufacturing, and was standing in a blizzard on a county road in Osceola County, waiting for a 72-year-old man with a wooden staff to decide whether to get in his car. "So did my son," I said. Raymond's expression did not change, but something moved behind his eyes, quiet and very serious. "I know," he said. "That is what we need to talk about." The hotel was 40 minutes south on US 131, a mid-sized place that catered to business travelers passing through on their way to somewhere larger. Raymond's team had taken 3 rooms on the 2nd floor. The room they brought me to was a corner suite, not ostentatious, but warm, with a desk and 2 chairs and a coffee maker that one of Raymond's assistants started without being asked. Max walked in, assessed the carpet, the heating unit, and the sight lines to both doors, and lay down under the desk with the air of an animal who had decided this location was acceptable and was prepared to remain indefinitely. Raymond dismissed his staff with a gesture that suggested he had been dismissing staff with gestures for 50 years and had long since stopped thinking about it. He took off his overcoat, hung it himself, and sat down across from me. For a moment we looked at each other across the desk. Raymond Whitfield had started Whitfield Automotive Group in 1974 with a single garage in Detroit, a used hydraulic lift, and what he had described in the one interview I had read as more stubbornness than capital. He had built it into one of the largest independent automotive component manufacturers in North America. He was 75 years old and he had the hands of a man who had not forgotten where he came from. Broad scarred across the knuckles, the left index finger slightly crooked from a break that had not been set properly. I recognized those hands. I had a version of them myself. "You want coffee?" Raymond said. It was not a question. "Yes," I said. He poured 2 cups himself, set one in front of me, sat back down. "I knew your work before I knew your name," Raymond said. Cole Precision had a reputation in the industry for 20 years. Tolerance specifications nobody else would commit to. Delivery schedules nobody else would guarantee. I tried to contact you 3 times about a joint venture. Your assistant told me you weren't interested in partners. "I wasn't," I said. "I know." Raymond wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. "Then 18 months ago I heard you'd had a stroke. Severe. That your son had taken over the company." He paused. "Then I heard nothing. You disappeared completely. No hospital records accessible. No forwarding address. Your company's performance dropped off a cliff the quarter. Derek Cole took control, and the man himself gave one press interview that made it clear he understood precision manufacturing, the way I understand interpretive dance." Something pulled at the corner of my mouth, despite everything. "That bad." He told a trade publication that tolerances were, and I am quoting directly, a matter of opinion. Raymond's expression conveyed his assessment of this position without requiring additional words. "I started looking for you 8 months ago. Hired 2 investigators. They found nothing. For most of that time, you had no registered phone, no active bank account, no social media presence, and every farmer you worked for paid you in cash or in kind. You were invisible to any conventional search. They found you last week only because one farmer's wife insisted on writing you a check rather than paying cash, and that check cleared through a rural branch account that had been dormant for 3 years and suddenly showed 1 deposit." He looked at me steadily. "I need to ask you something directly." "Go ahead," I said. "What happened to you?" I looked at my coffee cup. I looked at my left hand wrapped around it, the knuckles still rough. The palm still calloused the hand of a man who had worked his entire life and intended to keep working. I looked up at Raymond, and I told him. Not everything. Not the version with every detail of every night and every hour on the floor of that barn, but the structure of it. The stroke, the hospital room, Derek and Sandra and Gary Plotkin, and the documents spread across the tray table, the 2-hour drive north, the wheelchair in the frozen mud, the first night with the temperature at 10 below, and Max lying across my chest to keep me alive. Raymond listened without interrupting once. His face was very still. His coffee went cold in front of him, and he did not touch it. When I finished, the room was quiet, except for the sound of the heating unit and Max shifting position under the desk. "Elder financial abuse," Raymond said. His voice had changed, it was quieter, and there was something in it that had not been there before. Under Michigan law, MCL 400.11, what Derek did, the coercion, the notarized document under duress, abandoning you without medical care, that is a felony. Multiple felonies. "I know what it is," I said. "What I need is someone who can prove it." Raymond nodded slowly. He reached into his jacket pocket and produced a phone, not the gesture of a man checking messages, but the deliberate movement of a man who has already decided what call he is going to make. "I have a legal team in Grand Rapids. Senior partner is a man named James Okafor. He has spent 15 years specializing in exactly this area of Michigan law." He looked at me. "But before I make this call, I want to make you an offer." "I'm listening," I said. "I am developing a next-generation precision component line for Whitfield. Tolerances that nobody in the industry currently believes are achievable in production volume." He paused. I believe they are achievable. I believe they are achievable because I have read every technical paper you published between 1987 and 2019. And I know that you solved 2 of the 3 core problems in your work on the Cole Series 7 line. His eyes were direct and completely serious. I want you as chief technical advisor. $8 million a year, your own lab space at our Grand Rapids facility, full authority over the engineering specifications. My chest tightened. $8 million a year. I had built a company worth 10 times that from nothing, and I had lost it in a hospital room at 11 o'clock on a Friday night, and sitting across from a man who was offering to hand me back the thing I was best at in the world. It hit me somewhere behind the sternum in a way I had not expected and could not entirely manage. "One condition," I said. Raymond did not hesitate. "Name it." "James Okafor files the case first. Everything else comes after. I don't work, I don't design, I don't put my name on anything until the legal process is underway, and Derek Cole knows it's coming." Raymond looked at me for a long moment. He looked at my hands. He looked at Max, who had emerged from under the desk and was sitting beside my chair with his chin level, and his eyes on Raymond, with an expression of calm, absolute evaluation. Raymond extended his right hand across the desk. I reached out with my left and took it. His grip was exactly what I expected. Firm, brief, the handshake of a man who meant what he said, and did not need to squeeze hard to prove it. 2 men who had built things with their hands sitting in a hotel room in a snowstorm, making an agreement the way agreements were supposed to be made. Raymond picked up his phone. He dialed. 2 rings. "James," Raymond said, "I need you in Grand Rapids by Monday morning. Bring your elder abuse team and clear your calendar for the week." A pause. "Because I just found Arthur Cole sitting in a snowstorm in Osceola County, and what his son did to him is going to make your career." He ended the call. He set the phone on the desk. "Monday," he said to me. I nodded. I picked up my coffee cup, cold now, but I drank it anyway because some things you finish regardless. "One more thing," Raymond said, looking down at Max. "Does he need anything? Food, water?" Max looked up at Raymond with an expression that indicated he had already identified the minibar and formed opinions about its contents. "He's fine," I said. "He's always fine." Arthur had the recording. He had the lawyer. He had Raymond Whitfield and the full weight of $1 billion legal team behind him. It looked like everything was in place. What he did not know, what none of us knew, was that the most important piece of evidence was already walking through the door on its own. Before I reveal it, comment "ready" below. I want to know you are with me for this next part, because this is where everything changes. A note before we continue, parts of this story are fictional, added to give the deeper message room to breathe. If you prefer stories without any fictional elements, this is a natural place to pause. James Okafor's office was on the 14th floor of a building on Monroe Avenue in downtown Grand Rapids, with a view of the Grand River that he probably never looked at, because men like James Okafor did not spend time looking at views when there was work on the desk. I met him on a Monday morning in the first week of January, 3 weeks after the snowstorm on the county road. Raymond had arranged everything. The meeting, the parking, a coffee that was waiting on the conference table when I walked in with Max at my heel and my staff in my left hand. James Okafor stood up when I entered, came around the table, and shook my hand without looking at my cane or my right side or any of the things people usually looked at first. He was 45, lean with close-cropped hair, and the focused, economical movements of a man who had learned long ago that wasted motion was wasted time. He wore a dark suit and no tie, and his desk had the organized density of someone who was working 6 cases simultaneously and knew exactly where everything was. "Mr. Cole," he said, "Raymond tells me your situation is one of the clearest cases of elder financial abuse he has encountered in 20 years of following Michigan law. I want to hear it from you directly, I told him. The same structure I had given Raymond, but with more detail. This time the specific language Derek had used in the hospital room, the way Gary Plotkin had stood at the door, without intervening the timeline from the signing, to the truck, to the farmhouse. James listened with a yellow legal pad in front of him, writing in a small, precise hand, asking questions at intervals that told me he already understood Michigan elder law well enough to know exactly which details would matter in court. When I finished, James set his pen down and looked at me directly. "The challenge," he said, "is the notarization. Gary Plotkin witnessed and certified that document. His signature is on it. Any defense attorney is going to argue that a licensed notary public observed a competent adult execute a legal instrument voluntarily." He paused. "Unless we can demonstrate that the notary himself knew the signature was coerced. Which means we need Gary Plotkin." "Then find him," I said. James nodded slowly. "We've already started. I have an investigator." His phone rang. He looked at the screen. His expression shifted not dramatically, but enough for me to notice. He held up one finger and answered. "James Okafor." A pause. "Yes." Another pause longer. "Send him up." He set the phone down and looked at me with the expression of a man recalibrating his morning. "Arthur," he said, "there is a man in the lobby who does not have an appointment. He says his name is Gary Plotkin. He says he is a notary public, and he says he came here rather than the federal building because he looked up the civil suit filing this morning and saw my name on the complaint. And he decided that speaking to plaintiff's counsel first gave him more options than walking into an FBI field office alone." My chest tightened so hard I had to set my coffee cup down. "He came," I said. "He came," James confirmed. Gary Plotkin looked nothing like the composed professional who had stood in my hospital room 3 years ago with a notary seal and a mechanical stamp. He was gray-faced and thinner than I remembered, with the hollowed-out look of a man who had not been sleeping properly for a very long time. He wore a jacket that was slightly too large for him now, and he held a small USB drive in both hands in front of him, the way a man holds something he is not sure he has the right to be carrying. He stopped in the doorway when he saw me. The color drained from his face entirely. His hands tightened around the USB drive until his knuckles went white, and for a moment I thought his legs might not hold him. "Mr. Cole," he said. His voice was barely above a whisper. "I did not know you would be here." "Sit down, Mr. Plotkin," James said, his voice even and completely without judgment. "We are all here now. That is what matters." Gary sat. He set the USB drive on the table in front of him with the careful deliberateness of a man setting down something that has been very heavy for a long time. His hands were trembling visibly, not the small tremor of cold or nerves, but the deep, sustained shaking of a man operating at the outer edge of his courage. "I need to say something before anything else," Gary said. He was looking at the table. His jaw worked. "I took $15,000. Cash. Derek Cole came to my office 2 weeks before the stroke, before, not after, and told me he needed a notary available on short notice for a family estate matter. I did not ask the right questions." He finally looked up and his eyes were red-rimmed and exhausted. "I knew something was wrong in that room. I heard what he said to you. I watched you sign that paper with your hand shaking so badly you could barely hold the pen." His voice cracked. "And I certified it anyway. And I have not slept a full night in 3 years." The room was very still. Max, who had been lying beside my chair, raised his head and looked at Gary Plotkin with a long level attention. "Why now?" James asked quietly. Gary's jaw tightened. Because last week an FBI field office in Grand Rapids made a records request to the state notary board. My name is going to come up in that request within the month. He pressed his lips together. I am not naive enough to think I am doing this purely because it is right. But I am doing it. And I have this. He pushed the USB drive toward James. I recorded the conversation in the hospital room, on my phone in my jacket pocket. I have kept it for 3 years. I did not know what to do with it, and I was afraid of what it meant for me if I used it. He exhaled a long, unsteady breath. Michigan is a one-party consent state. I was a party to that conversation. The recording is legal. James picked up the USB drive. He looked at it. He looked at me. Play it, I said. James plugged it into his laptop. He turned the screen slightly so we could both see the audio waveform as it played. He pressed play. The recording quality was imperfect, muffled by the jacket fabric, the hospital's ambient hum underneath everything, but the voices were clear enough. Derek's voice. Low, close to the microphone, the particular flatness of a man who had rehearsed what he was about to say. Every word exactly as I remembered it. The threat about Max. The threat about the breathing support. The silence that followed my silence, the silence of a man with no voice deciding between two kinds of loss. Then the faint broken sound of a pen moving across paper. James stopped the recording. He closed the laptop. He wrote something on his legal pad. He underlined it twice. Mr. Plotkin, James said, I am going to recommend to the prosecuting attorney that your cooperation be considered in any charging decision regarding your role. I cannot promise you an outcome. What I can tell you is that this recording, combined with the medical records and the timeline evidence we already have, gives us everything we need to file. Gary Plotkin put both hands over his face. His shoulders shook once hard, like a man who has been holding a wall up for 3 years and has just been told he can put it down. James looked at me across the table. I looked at the closed laptop sitting between us with Derek's voice still inside it. File it, I said. James filed on a Tuesday. Michigan Circuit Court, Kent County. 3 counts, elder financial abuse, under MCL 400.11 undue influence in execution of a power of attorney and notary misconduct. The filing ran 47 pages, not counting exhibits. Gary Plotkin's recording was Exhibit A. My hospital admission records were Exhibit B. The GPS data from the tracker I had installed on Max's collar 4 years ago, a small waterproof unit I had fitted there after Eleanor died, because I was an engineer who prepared for contingencies, had been transmitting location pings to a cloud account registered in my name. Derek had never known the device existed, and the account remained active on automatic renewal through the credit card he had not yet thought to cancel before the civil suit was filed. James's investigator pulled the full location history within 24 hours of being retained, exact coordinates and timestamps logging every location Max had been taken to, including the Osceola County farm, cross-referenced to the minute with my discharge paperwork from Spectrum Health. The timeline was airtight. James called me at noon. It's filed, he said. Process server is delivering to Derek's residence this afternoon. Sandra will receive separately at the same address. A pause. Arthur, I want to prepare you. This becomes public record the moment it hits the docket. Grand Rapids Press will have it by morning. Good, I said. Let them have it. I was standing in the farmhouse kitchen when I said it, looking out the window at the frozen fields. Max was beside me, his chin resting on the windowsill, his breath fogging the cold glass. Outside, the January sky was the flat white of a Michigan winter that had not decided yet whether to snow again. I had spent 3 years in this kitchen, eating salted pork from my grandfather's root cellar, and teaching my mouth to form words, and pulling myself upright on a rope hung from a barn beam. I had spent 3 years waiting for this Tuesday. It felt quieter than I expected. Not disappointing, just quiet. The way the moment a machine finally starts after a long repair is never as loud as the work that preceded it. James called back at 4:15. "Process server made contact," he said, and I could hear something restrained in his voice, the professional version of satisfaction. Derek signed for the summons at 3:52. I have a contact at his building who says he was on the phone within 2 minutes of receiving it. Shouting. A beat. Sandra was served simultaneously at the same address. My contact says she did not shout. She closed the door very quietly. I thought about that, Derek shouting, Sandra closing the door quietly. It told me everything about both of them that I had not already known. "There is one more thing," James said. "Derek has retained Marcus Webb." "I don't know that name," I said. "You would if you followed Michigan civil litigation. Webb is the most expensive defense attorney in the state. $1,500 an hour. He wins by exhausting the other side financially." James paused. "He is very good." My jaw tightened. Outside the window, Max had lifted his head from the sill and was watching a crow land on the fence post at the edge of the property with the focused attention of an animal who had not yet decided whether this required action. "How much does Derek have left?" I asked. "Our forensic accountant estimates coal manufacturing's liquid reserves at somewhere between $400,000 and $600,000, James said. "After legal fees, payroll obligations, and the outstanding debt to his private creditors, probably less. Marcus Webb at $1,500 an hour," I said slowly, "will burn through that in under 3 months." "Yes," James said, "he will. And when the money runs out," I said, "Webb walks." "Webb always walks when the money runs out," James confirmed. "He has a reputation to maintain." I set the phone down on the kitchen counter. I looked at Max, who had lost interest in the crow, and was now looking at me with his ears forward and his head tilted at the angle that meant he was reading my face. "Derek just hired the most expensive lawyer in Michigan," I told him. "With money he doesn't have. To fight a case he can't win." Max's tail moved once, a single slow sweep that somehow managed to convey both acknowledgement and the complete absence of sympathy. I picked up my coffee. It had gone cold while I was on the phone, but I drank it anyway. 3 months, I said. "Give it 3 months." I started work at Whitfield's Grand Rapids facility in February. Raymond had converted a corner of the engineering floor into a dedicated lab space. Nothing extravagant, just a long workbench, a drafting table, a computer. I used reluctantly and enough precision measuring equipment to make me feel like myself again the moment I walked in. My right hand was recovering slowly enough to hold a caliper, steady enough to trace a line on a technical drawing if I went carefully. Not enough for everything. Enough for this. I did not announce myself. I did not give interviews. I came in at 6 in the morning, worked until 3, drove back to Osceola County with Max, and let Raymond's communications team handle the rest. The product line I was developing was a series of high-tolerance pneumatic components for automotive assembly systems, the kind of precision work that coal manufacturing had built its reputation on for 20 years, now being executed with materials and process controls that had not existed when I first designed those specifications. The work was absorbing in the way only good technical problems could be absorbing, filling the hours, completely leaving no space for anything else to get in, which was exactly what I needed. James called in March with the first report. "Whitfield's new component line hit the market last week," he said. 3 of coal manufacturing's top 5 accounts have already requested quotes. 2 have signed letters of intent. A pause. Derek's sales team apparently had no idea this was coming. They wouldn't, I said. I designed their procurement specifications. I knew exactly what they needed before Derek's people knew what questions to ask. By April, the calls from James had a different quality, less reporting, more containing information he was not sure how to deliver. Coal Manufacturing filed for Chapter 11 protection this morning, he said on a Thursday in late April. His voice was careful. Voluntary petition. They're claiming temporary liquidity issues. I set down the caliper I was holding. I looked at the workbench in front of me, the drawings I had made, the components I had designed, the work I had done with my one good hand over 40 years that had built the thing that was now being dismantled by my son's incompetence. My throat tightened in a way I had not expected. "Arthur," James said, "are you all right?" "That was my company," I said. The words came out rough. "I built that from nothing. Every machine, every specification, every contract. That was 40 years of my life." "I know," James said quietly. I picked the caliper back up. I set it down again. "What happens to the workers?" I asked. "Chapter 11 is reorganization, not liquidation. They keep operating while the court oversees restructuring." James paused. "But Arthur, our forensic accountant, flagged something in the filing. The numbers don't reconcile. There are entries that suggest that the books have been manipulated. Significantly." My jaw tightened. Derek, James confirmed. "I've already been in contact with the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. They've been watching Cole's financials since the civil suit was filed. This gives them what they needed." Another pause. "The FBI is opening a parallel investigation for wire fraud and tax evasion. Federal charges, Arthur. This is no longer just a civil matter." I looked out the window of the lab at the Whitfield parking lot, gray and flat under an April sky. Marcus Webb had withdrawn from Derek's defense 2 weeks ago. Exactly as predicted. The most expensive lawyer in Michigan had collected his fees and walked away the moment the retainer ran dry. Derek was now facing a federal criminal investigation with no attorney and no money. Raymond appeared in the lab doorway. He looked at my face and read it the way experienced men read faces. "Chapter 11, he said. "This morning," I said. Raymond walked to the workbench and stood beside me, looking at the technical drawings spread across the surface. He was quiet for a moment, not the silence of a man with nothing to say, but the silence of a man choosing carefully. "Those workers," Raymond said. "The ones at Cole. How many have been there more than 10 years? I thought about Pete Garza, Rodriguez, the morning crew who had called 911 the day I went down on the factory floor. 40, maybe 50, I said. Raymond nodded slowly. "We should talk about that," he said, "when this is finished." I looked at the drawings. I thought about 40 years of work and 50 men who had given their working lives to something I had built, and what it meant that the thing was now broken in a federal bankruptcy filing. "When this is finished," I agreed. James called on a Thursday morning in late June. "FBI made their move this morning," he said. Derek and Sandra were both brought in for questioning at the federal building on Michigan Street. Separate vehicles, separate rooms. Standard procedure for co-defendants when the Bureau wants to test whether their stories match. I was at the workbench in the Whitfield lab, a set of tolerance specifications spread in front of me. I set my pencil down. "Did they match?" I asked. James made a sound that was not quite a laugh. "They did not match at all." He explained what his contact inside the federal building had told him. Derek had been in the interrogation room for 40 minutes before he started talking. Once he started, he did not stop. He told the agents that the entire plan, the research into Michigan POA law, the preparation of the documents, the timing of the hospital visit, the arrangement with Gary Plotkin had been Sandra's. All of it. He said he had raised concerns and she had overruled him. He said he was, in his own words, just trying to protect the family business. He threw her completely under the bus, James said. What did Sandra say? I asked. Sandra asked for an attorney before she answered a single question, James said. Which is her legal right, and also from a tactical standpoint, exactly the wrong move when your co-defendant is already talking in the next room. A pause. When her attorney arrived and she was informed of what Derek had already said, she revised her position. She told the agents that Derek had conceived and directed the entire operation, and she had participated under pressure. I thought about Sandra closing the door quietly when the process server came. I thought about 2 years of preparation, of research, of waiting. And I thought about Derek, who had not been able to betray me on his own 3 years ago, and apparently could not stop betraying people even now. He couldn't even stay loyal to his own conspiracy, I said. No, James said. He could not. Another pause. Both are being charged. Federal indictment on wire fraud and tax evasion for Derek. Conspiracy and elder abuse for Sandra. They'll be arraigned next week. Both will likely be released on bail with conditions: GPS, ankle monitors, surrendered passports, no contact with you or with each other. Max had come to stand beside my stool. He pressed his head against my knee hard the way he did when he had decided I needed grounding. I put my hand in his fur. Arthur, James said, and his voice shifted into something more careful. I need to tell you something else. When Derek was informed that Sandra had revised her statement to implicate him, he became extremely agitated. The agents described it as a complete loss of composure. James paused. He told them he had nothing left. That the company was gone, the money was gone, his attorney had quit, and his wife had just put everything on him. He said, and I am reading from the agent's notes directly, I have nowhere to go. I have nothing. The lab was quiet around me. Outside the window, a June afternoon was doing what June afternoons did in Michigan, warm green, completely indifferent to the things happening indoors. He has nowhere to go, I said slowly. That is what he said, James confirmed. A man with no money, no lawyer, no company, and a wife who had just handed him to the FBI. A man who believed 3 years ago that he had left his father to die in a farmhouse in Osceola County. I knew exactly where a man like that would go when he had nothing left. James, I said, if Derek cuts his ankle monitor and runs, how quickly does the FBI know? A brief pause. The alert is instantaneous. The moment the circuit breaks, the monitoring center gets a notification. They'd have his last known GPS position within seconds. And if his phone stays on, I said, they can track his direction. Yes, James said carefully. Arthur, what are you thinking? I looked at Max. Max looked at me. His tail was very still. I'm thinking, I said, that I need to make a phone call to my farmhouse and make sure the porch light is on. The call came at 11:40 on a Tuesday night in December. I was in the farmhouse kitchen reading a technical journal at the table, Max asleep on the floor beside the wood stove. The fire had burned down to coals, and the kitchen was warm in the particular close way of a room that has been heated all day by good hardwood. James's name on the phone screen. He cut the monitor, James said the moment I answered. 40 minutes ago. The FBI alert went out immediately. Last GPS ping on his ankle unit was his apartment building in Grand Rapids. His phone is still active. They're tracking it, moving north on US 131. A pause. Arthur, he's heading your direction. The agent in charge wants to know if you want a unit at the property tonight. Tell them yes, I said. But tell them to stay back from the house. No lights, no vehicles on the gravel track. I want them at the tree line on the east side. A brief silence. You want to talk to him first? I have things to say, I said. I have been waiting 3 years to say them. I would like 30 minutes. James was quiet for a moment. I'll relay that to the agent in charge. Arthur, be careful. I set the phone down. Max had lifted his head from the floor the moment the phone rang. He was watching me now with his ears forward and his eyes fully alert, the sleep gone from him, completely replaced by the focused attention of an animal who had read the room and understood that something was changing. You know who's coming, I told him. Max stood up. He walked to the back door and stood there looking at it, his tail very still. Not yet, I said. Come here. He came back and sat beside my chair. I put my hand on the back of his neck and felt the tension in him coiled ready, every muscle in his 92-pound frame oriented toward the door like a compass needle finding north. I went through the house and turned off the exterior lights. Then I went to the bedroom and changed out of my reading clothes into dark trousers and a wool shirt. Not for any tactical reason, but because I had thought about this moment for 3 years, and I was not going to face it in my house clothes. I came back to the kitchen and put on the coffee. While it brewed, I sat at the table and looked at my hands. The right hand had recovered enough over the past year to be useful again, not fully, not the way it had been, but enough. Enough to hold a coffee cup, enough to sign a document, enough to do what hands were for. I thought about the last time Derek had been in this kitchen. He never had been. Of course, he had not come inside the house the day he left me here. He had stopped at the edge of the property, transferred me from his rental truck to the frozen ground, and driven away. He had never seen what I had built inside these walls over 3 years. He was about to. Ruth had called at 9 that evening before any of this started. She made her weekly call on Tuesdays to check in, and we had talked about the weather and the condition of her equipment, shed roof, and a recipe she was trying with the dried apples from her orchard. Before she hung up, she said, as she sometimes did at the end of calls, "You doing all right, Arthur?" "I'm doing fine, Ruth," I had said. Better than fine. She had a way of hearing more in a sentence than the words carried. "Okay," she said. "You call me if you need anything." I would not need anything, but I had been glad she called. At 12:50, Max's head came up from beside the stove. He did not growl yet. He simply raised his head and oriented his ears toward the front of the house, and every hair along his spine lifted in a slow, deliberate ridge that ran from his shoulders to the base of his tail. I heard it 30 seconds later, the sound of a vehicle moving slowly down the gravel track, with its headlights off, the engine noise muffled by the snow that had been falling for the past 2 hours. The tires crunching through the frozen crust of the drive in a halting, uncertain way that told me the driver did not remember exactly where the track curved. The engine stopped. A car door opened and closed. Footsteps in the snow, uneven, hurried the gait of a man who had been driving for hours and was cold and frightened and moving on something beyond rational thought. Max stood up from the floor. He walked to the front door and stood facing it. The fur along his spine was fully raised now. From deep in his chest came a sound that was not yet a growl, but was everything that preceded one, a low, resonant warning that I felt more than heard vibrating in the floorboards under my feet. I picked up my staff from beside the table. I stood up. Through the front window, a figure appeared out of the snow. A man in a city coat, completely wrong for a Michigan. December, moving toward the porch with his shoulders hunched and a bag in his right hand, and the particular desperate forward lean of someone who has run out of other directions. I walked to the front door. I put my hand on the latch. "Stay close," I told Max. I opened the door. Derek stopped walking the moment the door opened. He was standing at the bottom of the porch steps, maybe 15 feet away, snow on his shoulders and in his hair. His city coat soaked through in a way that told me he had been outside longer than just the walk from the car. He was thinner than the last time I had seen him, thinner and grayer, and wearing the particular hollowed-out expression of a man who had spent months being reduced layer by layer to whatever was underneath. He was staring at me. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. Beside me, Max stepped through the doorway onto the porch. He moved without rushing, a slow, deliberate placement of each foot, his head lowered to shoulder height. His eyes fixed on Derek with an unblinking intensity that made the air between them feel like something physical. The sound that came from his chest was not a bark. It was lower than that. It was the sound of an animal communicating a very specific and completely serious message. Derek took one step back. His heel caught the bottom step, and he stumbled, catching himself, his bag dropping into the snow. "Dad," Derek said. His voice cracked on the word. "Dad, I didn't think—" He stopped. He looked at the house behind me. He looked at my clothes, my staff, the way I was standing. His face was doing something complicated and not entirely voluntary, the face of a man whose mind is trying to reconcile what he is seeing with what he believed to be true. You fixed it. You fixed all of it." "Yes," I said. "I did." He took another step toward the porch. Max moved one step forward and Derek stopped immediately. "Dad, please." His voice broke apart on the second word. His eyes filled and spilled over tears, cutting lines through the cold and the dirt on his face. He was shaking, not just from the cold, though the cold was real and serious, but from something deeper, the full-body tremor of a man who has held himself together past the point where holding together was possible. "I have nothing left. Sandra is gone, the company is gone, there are federal charges, I don't have anywhere to go. You're my father. You're the only thing I have left." I looked at my son. I looked at him for a long time, at the boy I had raised, the man he had become, the person who had stood in a hospital room and threatened to take the life of the one creature that had never asked anything from me except to be near me. I looked at him and I felt the full weight of it, not just the anger which was still there, clean and cold, and exactly the right temperature, but the grief underneath the anger, the grief of a father who had loved his son and discovered that love was not a protection against what people were capable of doing to each other. My throat tightened. My left hand gripped the staff until the wood pressed hard against my palm. Then I opened my mouth. "3 years ago," I said, "you walked into a hospital room where your father was lying, unable to speak or stand, and you used the life of his dog to make him sign away everything he had built in 40 years. Then you drove him 2 hours north and left him in a frozen farmhouse with no food, no money, and no way to call for help. You left him there because you were certain he would die before spring, and a dead man cannot testify." Derek's face collapsed. "Dad, I am not finished," I said. My voice did not rise. It did not need to. It carried the way voices carry in cold air, clean and complete, reaching every corner of the dark yard. "You did not steal my company, Derek. You stole the building and the equipment and the accounts. The thing that built all of it, the 40 years of knowledge in my hands and my head. You cannot sign that away in a hospital room. You cannot notarize it. You cannot put it in a folder and drive away with it." I looked at him steadily. "A man paid me $8 million a year for that knowledge. Your lawyers charged you $1,500 an hour trying to fight it, and when your money ran out, they left you standing alone, which is what hired loyalty always does." Derek was crying openly now, his shoulders shaking, his breath coming in the ragged, undignified gasps of a man who had run completely out of composure. "I know what I did," he said. "I know. Sandra, she planned it. She told me it was the only way. She said you'd be comfortable, she said. She said what you needed to hear." I said, "Because you wanted to hear it. That is not her crime. That is yours." The words landed. I watched them land. Derek's legs gave. He went down to one knee in the snow, his hand coming up to cover his face. A sound coming out of him that I had no name for, raw and broken, and entirely too late. I looked at him kneeling in the snow in front of the house where I had rebuilt myself from nothing, and I felt not satisfaction, not triumph, but a profound and exhausting completion. The closing of something that had been open for 3 years, bleeding. "You are my son," I said quietly. "You will always be my son, and what you did will follow you for the rest of your life, because that is how justice works in this country, not because I want it to, because you earned it." I looked toward the tree line to the east. The lights came on. 4 sets of headlights simultaneously cutting through the snow from the eastern fence line, moving toward the house. Behind them, the blue and red of federal vehicle lights strobed against the snow, and the bare oak trees turning the whole yard into something that looked like the end of a long story, finally arriving at its last page. Derek's head came up. He saw the lights. A sound tore out of him, not words, just the sound of a man understanding all at once that there was no version of this ending that did not begin with handcuffs. He scrambled to his feet and spun toward the car. He made it 4 steps. Max was faster. 92 pounds of German Shepherd hit the snow between Derek and the car in a single bound, planting himself directly in Derek's path, every hair raised, teeth showing a sound coming from him that stopped Derek as completely as a wall. Derek froze. The FBI agents came across the yard fast and professional, and within 60 seconds, Derek Cole was face down in the snow, with his hands behind his back, and a federal agent reading him his Miranda rights in a flat, practiced voice that had delivered those words hundreds of times before and would deliver them hundreds of times again. I stood on the porch with my staff and watched. Max came back to me when it was done and pressed against my left leg, his warm flank against my knee, his breathing slow and even. I put my hand on the back of his neck. The snow was still falling. It fell on the farmhouse my grandfather had built on the fields I had learned to survive in on the yard, where I had vomited in the mud 3 years ago trying to drag myself to the root cellar with one working arm. It fell clean and indifferent and complete, covering everything equally. One of the agents looked up at me from the yard. "Mr. Cole, we'll need a statement at your convenience." "Tomorrow," I said. "You can have the statement tomorrow." He nodded and turned back to his work. I looked at Max. "Come on," I said. "It's cold out here." We went inside. I closed the door. The coffee was still warm on the stove, and I poured 2 cups, one for me, and one that I set on the counter for Ruth when she came by in the morning, because she would come the way she always came, and she would want to know everything, and I would tell her. For the first time in 3 years, I had nothing left to wait for. The sentencing was on the Thursday in February. I did not attend in person. James had offered to arrange it, and Raymond had offered to come with me. And Ruth had said nothing, but had looked at me in the way she looked at things she was prepared to argue about, if necessary. I told all 3 of them the same thing I had already said, what I needed to say to Derek, in a snowy yard in December, in the dark, with no audience, and no record, and no performance involved. A courtroom was for the law. What had happened between my son and me was not something a sentencing hearing could improve upon or take away. James called at 2:15 with the verdicts. I was in the farmhouse kitchen. Ruth was at the table across from me with a cup of coffee because she had driven over that morning and simply not left, which was her way of being present without making a production of it. Max was asleep beside the wood stove, his legs moving slightly in whatever he was chasing in his dream. "Derek," James said. 12 years, federal penitentiary, elder financial abuse, wire fraud, tax evasion. The judge cited the premeditated nature of the asset transfer and the deliberate abandonment without medical care as aggravating factors. A pause. Sandra, 9 years. Conspiracy to commit elder abuse, financial fraud. Her attorney argued reduced culpability. The judge disagreed. I set my coffee cup down on the table. Ruth looked at my face. She did not ask me how I felt. She reached across the table and put her hand over mine, rough, warm, the hand of a woman who had spent 68 years doing useful things with her hands. And she left it there. My throat was working around something I could not immediately identify. Not triumph, not relief exactly. Something older and more complicated, the feeling of a weight that has been so present for so long that when it finally lifts, the absence of it is almost disorienting. Gary Plotkin, James continued. Notary license permanently revoked. 3 years probation, no prison time. He had signed a formal cooperation agreement with the Kent County Prosecutor's Office 4 months earlier, full disclosure, complete testimony. The recording handed over without conditions in exchange for a sentencing recommendation that acknowledged his role as a peripheral participant, acting under financial pressure rather than as a primary architect of the scheme. The judge accepted the recommendation. I did not contest it. Plotkin had walked into that law office on his own, and that had mattered. A pause. Arthur, the civil matter. Judge Holloway has issued a formal ruling voiding the power of attorney in its entirety. The transfer of Cole Precision Manufacturing was obtained under duress and is legally null. The assets revert to you. What's left? I asked. After the Chapter 11 proceedings and the creditor settlements, the physical facilities, most of the equipment, the trade name and the customer relationships that didn't transfer to Whitfield. The liquid assets are largely gone, but the bones are there. James paused. Raymond has authorized me to convey a purchase offer. He's prepared to pay fair market value, which our appraiser estimates at. Tell Raymond no, I said. A brief silence. Arthur, tell him I said thank you, I said, and tell him no. I heard James write something. What do you want to do with it? I had been thinking about this since April, since the morning James had told me Cole Manufacturing had filed for Chapter 11, and I had asked him how many workers had been there more than 10 years. I had been thinking about Pete Garza, who had held my hand on the factory floor and talked to me steadily until the ambulance came. About Rodriguez, who had been working the east wall stack for 11 years and had called 911 with a voice that cracked because he was 24 years old and frightened. About the 47 men and women whose names were in the payroll records I had signed every 2 weeks for 2 decades. There is a mechanism called an Employee Stock Ownership Plan, I said, an ESOP. The company issues shares to a trust, and the trust distributes ownership to the employees over time. The workers become the owners. I paused. I want to use the Whitfield contract income to purchase the Cole assets out of the bankruptcy auction. Then I want James to set up an ESOP and transfer ownership to the workers. The people who built that company with me. Not to me. Not to Raymond. To them. The silence on the phone was longer this time. That is, James said carefully, a significant amount of money to give away. I have $8 million a year coming in from Whitfield, I said. I live in a farmhouse in Osceola County. I drive a 1987 Ford. I do not need it. Another silence. Then James said, with something in his voice that was not quite professional neutrality, I'll start the paperwork. Ruth was watching me when I put the phone down. Her hand was still on mine. Pete Garza is going to own part of the company he's worked at for 17 years, I told her. Ruth's eyes went bright. She pressed her lips together for a moment, the way she did when she was managing something. Good, she said. That's a good thing, Arthur. James drove out to the farmhouse the following week with the documents. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I had eaten salted pork from my grandfather's mason jars in the first winter, where Ruth had sat across from me with her yellow notepad, teaching my mouth to make the shape of a word. The ESOP transfer documents were 43 pages. James walked me through every page the way he walked through everything methodically, completely, without rushing. At the signature line on the final page, I picked up the pen. I paused. 3 years ago, in a hospital room at 11 o'clock on a Friday night, I had signed a document with my left hand, shaking with tears running into my hair, because a man had threatened the life of my dog and the continuation of my own. The signature had looked like the work of a man who was falling apart at the seams, because that was exactly what it was. I transferred the pen to my right hand. The right hand that had been useless for 3 years. The right hand I had rebuilt with a rope hung from a barn beam and sheer refusal. It was not what it had been. The grip was not as strong, the fine motor control not as precise, but it closed around the pen. It held. I signed my name. The signature was not perfect. It was uneven, slightly labored, the signature of a hand that was still finding its way back. But it was mine, produced by my right hand freely and without threat or coercion, transferring 40 years of work to the people who had helped me build it. James looked at the signature. He nodded once. "It's done," he said. I set the pen down. I looked at the document. I looked at my right hand. Max got up from beside the stove, walked over, and put his chin on my knee. "I know," I said. "I know." Ruth stood up and put the coffee on without being asked, because that was what Ruth did, and the kitchen filled with the sound of the percolator and the smell of the wood stove and the particular warmth of a room that has been lived in honestly and with purpose. Outside, the February fields were still white under the last of the winter snow, but at the south edge of the property, where the ground caught the most afternoon light, the frost was beginning to pull back from the soil in the way it did every year, reluctantly at first, and then all at once. Spring was coming. It always came. I am 73 years old. I live on a farm in northern Michigan with a gray-muzzled German shepherd who still thinks he runs the property. Most mornings I drink my coffee on the porch and watch the fields, and I think about what it cost to get here. Here is what I know now that I did not know 3 years ago. What a man builds with his hands can be taken. What he builds inside himself cannot. I lost company, a voice, and the use of my legs, and I rebuilt all three from barn hardware and rope, and one neighbor who showed up with soup and refused to leave. God does not always remove the storm. Sometimes he just makes sure you are standing when it ends. I have lived a grandpa story that I would not wish on anyone. If this family story teaches you one thing, let it be this: do not wait until everything is taken to understand what matters. I waited too long to see my son clearly. Do not make my mistake. The people around you, look at them honestly while you still can. A man's worth is not in his accounts. It is in what he does when the accounts are gone. If this grandpa story stayed with you, if this family story of loss and rebuilding meant something, leave a comment below and tell me where you are watching from. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And if you believe these family stories deserve to be told, subscribe so you never miss the next one. Thank you for staying until the end.